The book that transformed a future president. In the bustling streets of Buenos Aires, a young economics student named Javier Milei stumbled upon a book that would completely obliterate his understanding of how the world works. That book was F.A. Hayek's New Studies in Philosophy, Politics, Economics, and the History of Ideas, published in 1978, an intellectual atomic bomb that would later propel Milei to the presidency of Argentina and fundamentally reshape his nation's economic destiny. This wasn't just another academic treatise gathering dust on university shelves. This was a revolutionary manifesto that exposed the greatest lie ever told about human society, that central planning could outperform the spontaneous wisdom of free markets. For Milei, reading Hayek was like discovering fire. It illuminated everything he thought he knew about economics, politics, and human nature itself. Prepare to have your mind blown. The intellectual earthquake that changed everything. When F.A. Hayek compiled this collection of essays, he wasn't just organizing papers, he was assembling an intellectual weapon of mass destruction aimed at the very heart of socialist thinking. Each chapter represents a precision strike against the arrogance of central planners who believed they could engineer society from above. Hayek's genius lay not just in his economic insights, but in his ability to weave together threads from philosophy, psychology, political theory, and history into a tapestry so compelling that it would inspire future leaders like Milei to literally reshape entire nations. Part 1. The Knowledge Revolution. The Use of Knowledge in Society. The essay that shook the world. Hidden within the pages of this collection is perhaps the most important economic essay ever written, The Use of Knowledge in Society. This single piece of writing contains enough intellectual dynamite to blow up every socialist paradise that was ever conceived. Hayek asks a deceptively simple question: how does society coordinate the actions of millions of individuals who possess only fragments of knowledge? The answer he provides is so elegant, so profound, that it completely revolutionizes how we understand economic systems. The price system, nature's information superhighway. Imagine you're standing in a market in Buenos Aires, watching thousands of people buy and sell. What you're witnessing, according to Hayek, is the most sophisticated information processing system ever created, more powerful than any computer, more efficient than any government bureau, more intelligent than any central planning committee. Prices aren't just numbers on a tag, they're carriers of information. When the price of beef rises, it instantly communicates to millions of people that beef is becoming scarcer relative to demand. Consumers adjust their buying habits, producers increase supply, and entrepreneurs search for substitutes. No central authority needed. No government directive required. The system regulates itself through the miraculous mechanism of market prices. This insight hit Javier Milei like a thunderbolt. Here was proof that the free market wasn't just efficient, it was more intelligent than any human mind could ever be. For a young economist raised in a country plagued by government intervention and economic chaos, this was nothing short of a revelation. The pretense of knowledge, demolishing the planner's arrogance. But Hayek doesn't stop there. He launches a devastating attack on what he calls the pretense of knowledge, the fatal conceit that human beings can understand and control complex social phenomena through reason alone. Central planners, Hayek argues, suffer from a fundamental delusion. They believe they can gather all the relevant information, process it through their superior intellects, and design optimal outcomes for society. But this is impossible because knowledge is dispersed. No single mind can possess all the information needed to coordinate a complex economy. Knowledge is tacit. Much of what we know cannot be articulated or transmitted. Knowledge is contextual. Information that matters depends on specific circumstances of time and place. Knowledge is dynamic. Information is constantly changing as conditions evolve. This analysis would later become central to Milei's political philosophy. He understood that Argentina's economic problems weren't due to incompetent politicians. They were inherent in the very attempt to centrally plan an economy. Part 2. The Spontaneous Order Revolution. The Miracle of Emergence. Perhaps the most mind-bending concept in Hayek's intellectual arsenal is spontaneous order, the idea that complex, beneficial social arrangements can emerge without conscious design. This isn't just economic theory. It's a completely new way of understanding human civilization. Consider language. No committee designed English. No government bureau created Spanish. These incredibly sophisticated communication systems emerged through the spontaneous interactions of countless individuals over centuries. They evolved, adapted, and improved without any central authority directing the process. The same principle applies to markets, legal systems, moral codes, and even cities. The most important and beneficial aspects of human society aren't the result of planning. They're the unintended consequences of human action, but not of human design. This insight revolutionized Milei's understanding of his role as a political leader. Instead of trying to design the perfect society, his job was to create the conditions where spontaneous order could flourish, primarily by getting government out of the way. The fatal conceit of socialism. Hayek's critique of socialism isn't just economic, it's philosophical and anthropological. Socialism, he argues, is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of human nature and social evolution. Socialist planners commit what Hayek calls the fatal conceit. They believe that because humans created civilization through reason, they can consciously redesign it through reason. But this gets causation backward. Civilization didn't emerge because humans were rational. Humans became rational because civilization emerged. Our moral intuitions, our economic behaviors, our social institutions, these weren't designed by clever philosophers. They evolved through a process of cultural selection that favored groups whose practices led to survival and prosperity. The market as evolution in action. Markets, Hayek shows, are evolution in action. Successful businesses survive and reproduce through profits and expansion. Unsuccessful businesses die out through bankruptcy and closure. This process doesn't require conscious direction. It's automatically guided by the profit and loss system. Government intervention disrupts this evolutionary process. When politicians bail out failing companies, they're preventing the natural selection that makes markets efficient. When they subsidize certain industries, they're distorting the information signals that guide resources to their most valuable uses. This evolutionary perspective became central to Milei's political program. He understood that Argentina's economic problems weren't technical issues to be solved by smarter policies. They were the result of interfering with the natural evolutionary process of markets. Part 3. The Methodology Revolution. The Limits of Scientific Method in Social Sciences. One of Hayek's most profound contributions was his analysis of methodology in social sciences. He argues that the methods that work brilliantly in natural sciences can be deeply misleading when applied to human societies. In physics, we can conduct controlled experiments, isolate variables, and discover universal laws. But human societies are vastly more complex than physical systems. They involve conscious agents who can change their behavior in response to our theories about them. The impossibility of social prediction. This leads to what Hayek calls the impossibility of social prediction. We can understand general patterns and tendencies, but we cannot predict specific outcomes with the precision possible in natural sciences. Any attempt to do so leads to what he terms scientism, the inappropriate application of scientific methods to social phenomena. This insight had profound implications for Milei's approach to economic policy. Traditional economists tried to fine-tune the economy using sophisticated mathematical models. But Hayek showed that such precision is impossible. The best we can do is create general rules that allow spontaneous order to emerge. The critique of constructivist rationalism. Hayek distinguishes between two types of rationalism. Evolutionary rationalism recognizes that reason is limited and that many beneficial institutions emerged through trial and error rather than conscious design. Constructivist rationalism believes that reason can consciously design optimal social institutions. Constructivist rationalism, Hayek argues, is the philosophical foundation of socialism and central planning. It assumes that because humans can reason about social problems, they can engineer solutions that are superior to what emerges spontaneously. This critique became fundamental to Milei's worldview. He understood that many of Argentina's problems stemmed from politicians who believed they could rationally design solutions to complex social problems. Instead, Milei advocated for what Hayek called negative reforms, removing obstacles to spontaneous order rather than trying to create positive outcomes. Part 4. The Legal and Constitutional Revolution. The rule of law versus the rule of men. Hayek's political philosophy centers on the distinction between the rule of law and the rule of men. True freedom, he argues, requires that government power be constrained by general, abstract rules that apply equally to everyone, including the government itself. The characteristics of true law. According to Hayek, legitimate law must be general. It applies to categories of people and situations, not specific individuals. Abstract. It doesn't specify particular outcomes, only general principles. Perspective. It applies to future actions, not past behavior. Certain, people can know what the law requires. Equal. It applies the same way to everyone. When government abandons these principles and begins issuing specific commands to achieve particular outcomes, it destroys the rule of law and creates what Hayek calls the road to serfdom. This constitutional theory became central to Milei's political program. He understood that Argentina's problems weren't just economic. They were legal and constitutional. The country needed to return to the rule of law, with limited government constrained by general principles rather than unlimited government pursuing specific social goals. The spontaneous evolution of legal systems. Just as markets evolve spontaneously, Hayek argues that legal systems evolve through the decisions of judges who apply general principles to specific cases. This common law tradition, he contends, is superior to the civil law tradition where legislators attempt to anticipate and regulate all possible situations. Common law evolves through trial and error, gradually discovering principles that promote social coordination. Civil law, by contrast, is based on the rationalist assumption that legislators can consciously design optimal legal rules. Part 5. The Historical Revolution. The Counter-Revolution of Science. Hayek traces the intellectual history of social science, showing how it was corrupted by attempts to imitate natural science. This counter-revolution of science led to socialism, central planning, and the belief that society could be engineered like a machine. The true revolution, Hayek argues, was the discovery by Adam Smith and other Scottish Enlightenment thinkers that beneficial social orders could emerge without conscious design. This insight was later forgotten as social scientists became seduced by the prestige and apparent precision of natural science methods. The Austrian school revolution, Hayek positions himself within the Austrian school tradition, which maintained the proper understanding of social phenomena even as mainstream economics became increasingly scientistic. The Austrian school understood that economics is about human action, not mechanical relationships. Subjective values cannot be measured or compared interpersonally. Markets are processes of discovery, not equilibrium states. Government intervention typically creates more problems than it solves. This Austrian perspective became the foundation of Milei's economic philosophy. He understood that mainstream economics, with its mathematical models and statistical analysis, was fundamentally flawed because it treated human beings as passive objects rather than active agents. The socialist calculation debate. One of the most important intellectual battles of the 20th century was the socialist calculation debate, in which Hayek and other Austrian economists argued that rational economic calculation is impossible under socialism. Without private property and market prices, Hayek argued, there is no way to determine the relative scarcity of resources or the efficiency of different production methods. Socialist planners would be flying blind, making decisions without the information that markets automatically provide. This debate wasn't just academic, it was prophetic. The eventual collapse of socialist economies vindicated Hayek's analysis and proved that market prices are indeed essential for rational economic calculation. Part 6. The Psychological Revolution. The Sensory Order and Social Order. Hayek's psychological theories, outlined in The Sensory Order, provide the foundation for his social philosophy. He argues that the human mind doesn't simply receive information from the external world. It actively constructs its understanding through processes of classification and pattern recognition. This psychological insight has profound implications for social theory. If individual minds construct their understanding of reality, then social order cannot be based on shared objective knowledge. Instead, it must emerge through processes that coordinate different subjective perspectives. Markets serve this coordination function by translating subjective preferences into objective price signals. No one needs to agree on the true value of anything. The market process reveals relative values through voluntary exchange. The critique of social justice. One of Hayek's most controversial positions is his critique of social justice. He argues that this concept is meaningless because it implies that society as a whole can be just or unjust, when in reality only individual actions can have moral qualities. The outcomes of market processes are neither just nor unjust. They are the unintended results of countless individual decisions. To call these outcomes unjust is to anthropomorphize the market process, treating it as if it were a conscious agent making moral choices. This doesn't mean that individuals cannot be unjust in their market behavior. Fraud, theft, and breach of contract are clearly unjust. But the distribution of income and wealth that results from honest market transactions cannot be evaluated using moral categories. This perspective influenced Milei's approach to inequality and redistribution. Rather than trying to achieve social justice through government intervention, he focused on ensuring that markets operate fairly and efficiently. Part 7. The Impact on Javier Milei. The Intellectual Transformation. For Javier Milei, discovering Hayek's work was like Neo taking the red pill in the Matrix. Suddenly, the economic chaos of Argentina made perfect sense. The country's problems weren't the result of external shocks or bad luck. They were the inevitable consequences of abandoning the principles that Hayek had identified. Argentina's hyperinflation, economic stagnation, and social unrest were all symptoms of the same underlying disease: the belief that government could improve on the spontaneous order of markets. Every government intervention, no matter how well-intentioned, disrupted the information and incentive systems that make markets work. The political revolution. Hayek's ideas didn't just influence Milei's economic thinking, they transformed his entire political philosophy. Traditional politicians promised to solve problems through government action. Milei promised to solve problems by reducing government action. This wasn't just a different policy approach, it was a completely different conception of what government should do. Instead of trying to achieve specific outcomes, government should focus on maintaining the general conditions that allow spontaneous order to flourish. The anarcho-capitalist vision. Milei's political evolution ultimately led him to anarcho-capitalism, the belief that even government functions could be provided more efficiently by private markets. While this might seem extreme, it's actually the logical conclusion of Hayek's arguments about spontaneous order and the knowledge problem. If markets are more efficient than government at providing goods and services, why not extend this principle to all government functions? Why not have private courts, private police, and private defense agencies competing for customers like any other business? The presidential campaign. When Milei ran for president, he carried Hayek's ideas directly into the political arena. His campaign wasn't just about different policies, it was about a fundamentally different understanding of how society works. Milei's promise to chainsaw the government wasn't just a rhetorical flourish, it was a direct application of Hayek's insights about the knowledge problem and spontaneous order. By reducing government, he would unleash the creative forces of the market and allow Argentina to return to prosperity. Part 8. The Continuing Revolution. The relevance of Hayek today. More than 4 decades after its publication, new studies in philosophy, politics, economics, and the history of ideas remains remarkably relevant. The problems that Hayek identified, the pretense of knowledge, the fatal conceit of socialism, the corruption of scientific method, are still with us. Modern challenges like climate change, technological disruption, and global inequality are often met with the same rationalist hubris that Hayek criticized. Politicians and intellectuals continue to believe that they can engineer solutions to complex social problems through conscious design. But Hayek's insights suggest a different approach. Instead of trying to control these processes, we should focus on creating the institutional conditions that allow spontaneous order to address them. Markets are already driving innovation in renewable energy. Entrepreneurs are already developing solutions to technological displacement, and global trade is already lifting millions out of poverty. The intellectual legacy. Hayek's influence extends far beyond economics. His ideas about spontaneous order have influenced fields ranging from biology to computer science. His critique of constructivist rationalism has shaped conservative and libertarian political philosophy. His analysis of the knowledge problem has transformed our understanding of information and decision-making. But perhaps, most importantly, Hayek showed that the choice between freedom and tyranny isn't primarily political, it's epistemological. It's about whether we believe that human knowledge is sufficient to consciously design optimal social arrangements, or whether we must rely on the evolved wisdom of spontaneous order. The future of freedom. As governments around the world face mounting challenges, the temptation to abandon the principles of spontaneous order and embrace central planning will only grow. But Hayek's analysis suggests that this path leads inevitably to economic stagnation and political tyranny. The future of freedom depends on our ability to resist this temptation and maintain faith in the spontaneous order of markets, even when their outcomes seem harsh or unfair. It depends on our ability to distinguish between the rule of law and the rule of men, between general principles and specific interventions, between negative and positive freedom. Conclusion: the enduring power of ideas. F.A. Hayek's New Studies in Philosophy, Politics, Economics, and the History of Ideas is more than just a collection of academic essays. It's an intellectual revolution that continues to shape our world. Through the mind and actions of leaders like Javier Milei, Hayek's ideas have moved from the seminar room to the presidential palace, from theory to practice. The book's central message is both simple and profound. Human societies are far too complex to be consciously designed, but they can achieve remarkable coordination through the spontaneous order of markets. This insight has the power to transform not just economies, but entire civilizations. As we face the challenges of the 21st century, we would do well to remember Hayek's fundamental insight. The curious task of economics is to demonstrate to men how little they really know about what they imagine they can design. In that recognition of our limitations lies the beginning of wisdom and the foundation of freedom. The revolution continues. The ideas that transformed Javier Milei's understanding of the world are still out there, waiting to transform the next generation of leaders. The question is, will we have the wisdom to listen? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more.